Local stories, local people. We're taking you inside Western Mass news. It's the Even Better Western Mass podcast with Dave Madsen.
Welcome to this week's edition of the Even Better Western Mass podcast. Wherever you are, hope you're doing well. Well, my guest on this second podcast of 2021 is Jessi Kirley. Jessi's the founder of the JKirley Collective. It's a new local collaborative that offers personal and professional development courses. Jessi found herself out of work thanks to the coronavirus pandemic, like so many people, and that led to the founding of the JKirley Collective. Jessi's goal is to help people navigate disruptions in their lives by empowering them to advocate for themselves. Here's my conversation with Jessi Kirley. Jessi, thanks for being a part of the Even Better Western Mass podcast. Hope you're doing well.
Yes, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start about the circumstances that led you to found the JKirley Collective.
Right. Well, no surprise, this year was tough for so many, and myself included. My previous role before COVID-19 hit was as executive director of the Family Business Center in the Pioneer Valley. This was an organization that was around for 25 years, and I went through a succession process in 2019. And shortly after I took the helm, COVID hit, and the board had to make the tough decision to close down permanently. And so that brought me to a kind of what's next moment. Of course, I'm on unemployment, job loss. I'm head of household. I've got 3 teens looking up to me, support them, and I also was deeply affected and feeling the global sorrow and grief and difficulties that people were having in the spring, especially with the healthcare workers and the frontline workers and essential workers. And it all just fed into this what matters most moment. And I had one of those big moments only just 2 years before. And so it was a mixed bag. Just 2 years before, I had lost my father to cancer. I decided to quit the work I was in, which was in the medical field. I was having burnout, just hitting the wall. And that year of 2018, I had a, what matters most moment. And that's where I keep coming back to, self-care, it's confidence, it's our self-respect, it's kindness, generosity. And then how can I help? And that's the other part for me, was how can I get out there and do something to help what's going on in the world with all the trauma around COVID-19. And I have leadership skills and development. I love that work and I'm committed to it. And certainly in Western Mass, I have been working with many small business owners. And so all of this was percolating, coming like, what's next? What's my purpose? What's my mission here? And what I did, which I think is a real defining piece about how I formed my new business, JKirley Collective, is not only did I look inside, what matters to me, what are my values, what do I care about, what do I have to offer, but also asking for help and asking for collaboration. And that decision was so good for me because I reached out to 2 colleagues, Andrea Bordenka, who is the CEO of Generative Leadership, the Institute for Generative Leadership. And I reached out to Amy Jamrog, who is with the Jamrog Group, a financial advisor. And these are 2 women that I had met in the past year and wanted to run my ideas by. And it created a safety net where I could explore my business vision. I could, fumble through, here's an idea, and they could kind of give me that look like, where are you going with that? Or they could say, yes, that's really landing. And it was this really incredible space to formulate my vision and my offering. And I also took a foundations course with the Institute for Generative Leadership, which really helped me clarify my own business offer. So all of these things came together, and it gave me a chance to define what matters most and how I want to make an offer to the world. And through that work is where dignity surfaced. And so what dignity, what does that mean? We have all of these different definitions of it. And what I landed on was the definition of dignity as self-worth. An inherent self-worth, something that we're all born with. And the power of connecting to that as a way to ground ourselves, to make really important decisions and move through change and have conversations and build that confidence to really move towards the life that we want and the life that matters to us.
Now, you talk about dignity awareness. And it sounds to me, because I've done a lot on emotional intelligence. It almost sounds along the same lines.
I'm so glad you said that. And we didn't plan this, people. But actually, yes, some of my training 2 years ago, when I had that what matters most moment then, was diving into emotional intelligence and leadership development and mindfulness. And I joined Key Step Media, which is a local organization. And they were developing the Daniel Goleman Emotional Intelligence Coaching Certification Program. It's a mouthful.
We should say, too, he happens to be local.
Yes, I wasn't sure if I could reveal that.
We just won't say where.
Yes, we won't reveal Dan Goleman's location. But yes, his son, Hanuman Goleman, and his wife, Kaya, they run Key Step Media. And I worked with them to help develop the program. And then I got to be a participant. And what I learned and have been continuing to learn about emotional intelligence is that it does begin with self-awareness, and it begins with checking in with ourselves. And I also really appreciate the neuroscience aspect of it. I do have to, I have a bias for science. I went to Smith and got my biology degree, and I thought I was going to, save the world and cure cancer and all of that. So I'm approaching it a little different way here, but I really respect the neuroscience behind it in that two key things, I think. One is that we have a negative bias. Our brains are wired to look for negativity and threats and to respond. And so that can really take over. And especially in times like right now, all the negativity and the stress and the just terrible things that are happening, it's very hard to fight that negativity bias that we are wired. But the problem with that is the negativity bias, if we feed into that, it's like what you put your attention on is what you get, right? So if you're focusing on the negativity and you're being caught up in the thoughts and the actions, then that's going to bring you in a certain direction. Whereas if we can build practices, which is like the work that I'm trying to offer, is these practices to connect to yourself, connect to your dignity, and to be able to kind of counteract that negativity bias that's going on.
I think part of that too is I'm as guilty of it as I think as the next person is, being in the media, that I could have 10 people tell me what a great job I'm doing and get that one person who is very critical of what I do. And it's almost like human nature for us to focus on that negative. And especially now when we're bombarded with it.
That's right. And not only, and what I discovered, not only focusing on the negative, but in particular, self-doubt, and in particular, questioning our worth. And by worth, I really mean our inherent worth, like our value as a human. And when we get beat down and we have all these challenges thrown at us, and in particular with COVID, these forced disruptions, we become often really questioning our abilities, right? We question our ability to get through it, or we question our own resilience. And so, and I discovered that as a business owner trying to start my own business, that those new starts, those disruptions are fertile ground for doubt. We're extra vulnerable, right? And so we often seek elsewhere to get that need met, right? If we just get that job, or if we just get that relationship, or if COVID would just go away, then we can feel worthy again. And what I think many of us are finding is that the external factors are always going to be there. Yeah. And so the inner practice is really where the strength comes from.
I suppose too, with anything that, when what we're finding with so many people losing their jobs, I would imagine the first thing that most people do is, well, what did I do to cause me to lose my job? Mm-hmm. They put the blame on themselves. That's as right. Opposed to looking at the circumstances that really caused this.
That's right. And that's kind of the negativity bias creeping in. And that's also reflective of what kinds of practices we have in place before the hardship comes. I mean, if we have a regular practice of self-worth, connecting to our dignity, and then embodying it, it's one thing to know something theoretically. It's another thing to feel it and to practice it, and then be able to leverage that to make important decisions. Sure. and actions. And so that's where I hope that people will remember that power is within.
Yeah, I guess coming back to, well, if I don't feel good about myself, how can I feel good about anybody else?
Right. We have so much less to give, and we have so much less awareness of that if we are doubting ourselves and questioning ourselves. Absolutely.
Now, I know one of the things you talk about is, and I think more to find out what you actually mean by helping the community that is navigate disruptions and build resiliency skills. So it's basically changing our perspective on things. Sounds like.
It's a piece of that, sure. It's a piece of changing perspective, and it's also very tangible practice. So as I was saying before about, it's one thing to know something theoretically, but to truly believe that you are worthy and in your value and what you have to offer, and then to be able to act from that place, you have to practice it. So it's a mindset, but then it's also a practice where, you think of any kind of muscle building, right? If you want to go to the gym, like, you don't just stand there and do 5 curls and like, woo, look at that. It has to happen little bits over time to see lasting change. And so this work is partly about the awareness, and then also about the practice.
I guess I can equate it with golf, that, you can't just stand up and hit a golf ball. It's that muscle memory, so that you're doing the same thing each and every time.
That's right. That's right.
To simplify it for people like me.
Yeah, right.
No, but I'm fascinated by this, because it's just, when I think of human nature, we tend to, again, as I said, kind of dwell on the negative. And it's unfortunate that it takes something like COVID and losing a job, or just this constant bombardment with just negative news each and every day, that we're talking about, the number of people who die, or I even think about, go back to the time when the World Trade Center attacks, and what we looked at more that day was the number of people who died, as opposed to the number of people who were saved. Mm-hmm. That we looked more at that negative aspect. I know those are just small things, but it all feeds into it.
It really matters where we put our attention. It really matters. It matters physiologically. It plays out in our relationships, and if it can play out in our physiology, in our bodies, if we're focusing more on stress and negativity, or we're not coping with it, we could have ramifications in our physical body. But it could also affect our relationships and our ability to build trust and accountability. If we're connected to our worth and our value, and we remember what we care about, and we use that to guide us, we're going to make better promises, for example. We're going to be a more reliable person, because we're going to be able to come through on our promises. And ultimately, that builds trust, that builds accountability, and then that gets you more towards where you want to go than if you're in a space where you're in doubt and you're kind of frantically trying to please others or perform. that's going to get you to a different place than if you're truly acting from your own alignment.
So where do we start? How do we go about making these changes?
Well, I kind of framed the programs using 3 pillars. And so the first one is like we've been talking a lot about self-awareness, and in particular self-awareness of dignity or self-worth. And so there's the exposure to that concept. There's talking about it. What does the word mean to you? Dignity. What is self-worth? How do we get that? How do we not get that? So there's exploring theory of it. And then the second pillar is the embodiment part. And that's where the practice comes in. We hear about this stuff with mindfulness and yoga and deep breaths and all of that. And this is related. It's not just being aware of how your body feels, but it's aware of how your body feels in relationship to your self-worth. So that's particular. So where do you find tension? Where do you find expansion? Where are you not connected, or where are you connected? And so that's a practice. And so, signing up to do that practice, just like you would sign up for a, physical therapy class or a music class, this is a kind of practice. And then the third pillar is the agency. It's the real juicy part of like, okay, now what are we going to do with this? How are we going to create the life that we want? And so then that's using particular tools. So in one of our programs, it's tools about conversation. So how do you use conversation to meet certain goals or outcomes? And in other future programs, it will be in different forms in terms of how that action is realized.
Now, are self-worth and self-esteem one and the same?
There's so many. It's a great question. And, I'm not going to try to put boxes on things or restrictions, but here's what it means to me. Self-worth is inherent. And self-compassion. Did you say self-compassion?
Or self-esteem. Yeah.
Self-esteem. Self-esteem is something that I think of that we build or we grow or that gets developed, whereas self-worth is there. It is pure. It is whole. We are born with it. So it's a nuance, but I think it's an important difference, because I'm not trying to send a message that there's something wrong with us, that we're broken in some way. Like, oh, you lost your self-worth. Oh, you lost your dignity. That's not the message I'm here to tell. You have it. Let's find it together. That's
because we all, it sounds like it's something we all have, but from the time we grow up, it's our surroundings. It's who we go to school with, who our friends are, our family, and somewhere along the way, it sounds like it just might get lost.
And it's how you define it. And I just found this recent article. I had put it up on one of my social media pages, and it had this, assessment where you could actually score your own self-worth. So how in certain areas, how do you rate yourself in that area? And what was really neat about that article for me is it got me thinking about, well, how do we really define our own self-worth? And it's very individual. Like you said, it's really based on our whole journey of our life. And so if you start by exploring that concept, how do I define my self-worth? Where is my dignity? Is it in the job title? Is it in the relationship status? Is it in money? I can't answer that for you, but what I'm finding in my research and what I'm finding in my own life is the more externally based we are, the harder it is to really hold on to it, because we've given that power over to something else to determine our own worth. And so it's about bringing that power back in and realizing that to define for yourself, how do you feel worthy? What things within yourself that you have that aren't defined by other things or other people.
And I know one of the things you talk about is learning and practicing dignity awareness. Is this one of those things that it's like once you find it, oh, good, I'm set? But it sounds like it's something that we have to every I don't know, 6 months or whatever, do a self-check of that?
Absolutely. And it's just because of the nature. I mean, we're back to neuroscience and emotional intelligence. I mean, we're fighting evolution. Our brain, sometimes you get an email and your brain thinks you're fighting a tiger, right? And you have, you feel the physiological response. You might sweat or, your heart starts to race, and it's not a tiger, but your brain doesn't know the difference. And so these things continue to happen more and more in the societies that we're living in. And it's about, again, carving out that practice and that commitment. But I think people have to feel the rewards of it before it becomes a practice, so it might be a change for some people, a change in practice, a new way of looking at it. And I know for me, I use the example of starting up the business. The thing that feels important in terms of a lost opportunity if we don't do this work is it can cause us to not go after things that could really make us happy or could really make our family life better, or what have you, or your health. So that's the loss. That's the risk of not doing this work and not connecting to your dignity and building that dignity awareness. It's missed opportunities for you, for your personal fulfillment.
We look at the way things are going on. Let's put COVID-19 in the mix and just the general negativity of many of our leaders, both in Congress and at the White House, and this constant bombardment with these negative things. It makes it even tougher than it would in a normal year. And I think the other thing that I wonder about with this is the impact of social media on all of this and our dignity awareness. That especially with younger people, it sounds like it could really have an impact on them.
Right. And you know what that comment made me think of is how often do we hear people say, gosh, so-and-so looks so happy on social media, or so-and-so seemed like they were really satisfied, but then you find out there's other truths underneath that, and so I think for kids, I have 3 teens, they're on social media all the time. And there's so much of that defining of themselves with the social media. And so it's a real trap. I mean, it's a real trap. And one of the things that I love about working with Andrea Burdenka, who we're co-designing our pilot program, Dignity in Conversation, is we've been talking a lot about the messiness of life and the messiness of dignity. And being able to be honest and transparent about that is so important. And I don't know if social media is quite up to that yet. I mean, I think there's still the dominating culture is, put out all your best stuff, all your shiny, sparkly things, and hide the mess. That's for home. And I challenge that. I think the mess is real for many of us, and it helps to know you're not alone in that.
But finding this dignity awareness, obviously, it's not an easy thing to do, and it's not something that we can do on our own. So let's talk about your launch of the Dignity series.
Okay, right, and that is important. Is we're trying to build community with this programming. There's so many one-off webinars, or it could be personal or professional development opportunities. There's tons right now. You just click on the internet and you got, a whole handful. So what we're trying to do that's a little different is we're creating a program that's compiled of a workshop plus a peer group session. So we're trying to more of a cohort experience so that you come to the workshop, you get some theoretical, you get little tastes of the embodiment practices. You'll get to hear from Andrea with the Institute for Generative Leadership specifics about how they do conversation, and some neuroscience sprinkled in there. And then that same cohort comes together again a week later in a peer group and a smaller group of, maybe 10 people, and get to kind of unpack and do a deep dive and get into the personal of it. What does this mean for me? And how am I going to use this in my life? How am I going to take this away and make that I want? So So I think that's a little different than some of the programs out there that is trying to build a little more of a community experience.
Ongoing and obviously support as you make this journey.
And the whole point of this is to break that norm of there is a right thing, or that you're supposed to perform to a certain level. And you're absolutely right. The ongoing journey is really meaningful to me to help facilitate that. Some of the work that I love the most doing with the Family Business Center was the roundtables or the peer groups. And so I built that into this model intentionally because I know that that's where some of the best work comes for people, whether it's personal or professional. And so we'll have the program. The first program is Dignity and Conversation, which is, like I said, the workshop and the peer group session. And then each program will build out additional programs in the Dignity series. And every program will also have the option for an ongoing monthly peer group. So if people choose to continue, they could remain with the cohort with that same kind of theme and the closest that's been developed between the members, and then they can continue on. And so I'm really excited to see how that plays out.
Given the fact that we're all different, that yes, while our common goal is dignity awareness, we all are going to take a different path to reach that.
Yes, right. It is very individual. And so our goal is to create this safe container for people to explore that. Maybe for the first time, maybe somebody's very familiar with exploring that kind of self-awareness and they want to try a different way. Maybe this is the first time that they're going to really connect to what it feels like in their body, this concept of self-worth. And so we're welcoming that whole range of experience. But the common theme is that it is a accessible power for all of us. It is an accessible tool and grounding place for us to all act from. And it does require some courage. I think you're right. You said it's not easy to look at this stuff. So it's stretching comfort zones for sure. But we're skilled and we're comfortable doing that as facilitators. We're all very aware of the vulnerability, the sensitivity. And so we're ready to kind of create that safe space.
You touched on this a bit, when we started out, but just as you look at this, reaching dignity awareness, the impact that it can have on so many aspects of our life as we move along, and just for our betterment and the betterment of everybody around us, including our families.
Absolutely. So back to neuroscience, and we were talking about triggers, so when we are faced with something and we have some kind of a trigger response, whether it's, a conflict, some kind of difficult conversation, whether it's a family relationship, a work relationship, community role, whatever it is, if we don't do a good job checking our reactions to those triggers, we might behave in ways that are not so ideal and won't get us the outcomes that we would hope for, right? And that could be in personal relationships or professional relationships. And so the risk of not doing some kind of work like this is that you're going to continue to be reactive, and you could hurt relationships. You might not get that promotion as a team leader because you don't handle yourself in conversations in the way that is needed in that culture. So it's people have to see that and want to change that before they'll step into this work, I think.
I think common, human nature too is that, well, I'll figure this out myself. That I can do this. I can pull myself out of this, but in reality, that somewhere along the way, we all need some kind of help to move forward, and there's nothing wrong with it.
That's a key thing, I think, in the vulnerability movement. Let's say Brene Brown's work and all emotional intelligence. It is about embracing that vulnerability and asking for help and shifting the mindset that that's weakness or that means you're failing. I don't really know where that came from in our culture. And I don't want to get into, politics or gender politics, but there's a lot of history there in our bodies, in our ancestors, in our spirits, and there's a lot of harm that has been done. Institutional racism, sexism. I mean, there's so many broken systems, and it impacts people's sense of self and sense of worth. And so there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do step by step.
So let's talk about the Dignity series, and for those who are interested, folks who are, and the timing is good on this because this is coming up, how to be part of the Dignity series.
Well, there's the pilot program launches on January 19th with Andrea Burdenka of the Institute for Generative Leadership. We're co-designing, and it is this is the pilot program of the Dignity series. And so in terms of that, there are workshops on the 19th, and then the follow-up peer group session is the week later on the 26th. And people can go to my website, JKirleyCollective.com, to sign up. And then we're going to be building out other programs under the Dignity series very soon after. I already have 3 additional ones ready to go.
Sounds true, given the fact that you're calling it a pilot program, that, yes, like everything else, this is a work in progress too.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the nature of my business, JKirley Collective, is to bring people together, try new things, do it with intention and care and, focus and compassion, and then see what happens. And, I might offer 6 Dignity series programs, but I don't know which ones are going to resonate. I don't really know where the stick's going to happen and what people are going to be drawn to. And so we're gonna have fun with that and think of it as a learning process, gathering information. I want participants to be really active in the feedback and help to form these programs to meet the needs of the people doing it.
I like you say too about fun. This is a fun process. This is, I think people might, again, tend to look at it as something negative, but it really doesn't sound like it at all. This is fun, and it's just bettering ourselves.
It is. And that's, again, back to the collaborative piece, is there was so many days this year, this spring, this summer, that I wanted to give up. I mean, this business vision and idea and all the details of how it's coming together, it's not a given. It's not that once you just wake up one day and decide and you're committed through the end. It's like the up and down and the struggles and the high days and the low days. And there was many times I wanted to give up, and I thought, why am I doing this? Who am I to do this? I'm crazy. And then there's other days where I'm just so uplifted by the work and by being able to, when I know I'm going to get on the call with Andrea or Amy or other collaborators, I walk away from that so fed, so fueled, so uplifted that every time I say, okay, that's why I'm doing this. Okay, that's the work.
We've covered a lot of ground in over almost half an hour, 35 minutes. Anything we missed? Anything you want to touch on that we haven't talked about?
The new year is often a time where people are ready to invest in themselves and kind of, okay, I'm going to do all the things I didn't do. And I just want to remind people, you're worthy no matter what. And so this work is only going to grow what's already there for you.
Jessi, good luck with this. Actually, I don't think you're going to need good luck. I think this is going to take off like nothing else. And I think it's something we all need, whether it's a business person or an individual.
Exactly.
My thanks to Jessi Kirley for being my guest on this week's edition of the Even Better Western Mass podcast. Now, if you'd like to learn more about JKirley Collective, you can go to her website, JKirleyCollective.com. I'm Dave Madsen. Thanks for watching or listening to this week's edition of the Even Better Western Mass podcast. Wherever you are, stay safe, stay well, and if you can, join me next week.